this research, as Dr. Gumbo said, I'm busy with my master's degree at the moment. I'm busy writing the dissertation. So within the next few months, that should also be off my back. And this is this is the data collection that I've done for my master's degree as well. So what you will see here will be contained eventually in both my master's dissertation, but in research outputs for the institute as well. So just a short background on that, so that you know where I come from with it. Very basic structure, methodology, some preliminary findings of the first level coding that I've done of the transcripts, and then I'll highlight the key issues in that section, and then just concluding with some main thoughts at the end. Right, I've combined the introduction and literature review to be able to almost tell you a bit of a story in terms of where my thoughts on this research started and where the research came from, and how the story of the idea of urban food insecurity has developed as well over the last few years. So main thing against the background of urbanization. Urbanization, as you all would know and would be aware of, and you don't even have to read an awful lot to know that, you can just open your eyes and see it. Urbanization is really on the rise in the world, and especially in the developing world. If you look at these statistics for Africa, though, you might, if you look at sort of noteworthy sources like UN Habitat, for example, you might still see in the number or the percentages of people living in urban areas, you might still argue with me in saying that, well, it's many countries have got more people living in rural areas, and that's perfectly true, and I'm not going to even fight with that for one moment. The key thing about urbanization on the African continent, and what is becoming worrying for policymakers, thinkers, global agencies, is the rate at which it's happening. Not necessarily the fact that it's happening, especially the rate at which it's happening. And on the African continent, it's happening a lot faster than many other parts of the developing world. So that's the first point. And one of these challenges that particularly seem to be on the rise is urban food insecurity, and the issue of how do people in the city get enough food to eat. There's just a quote for you, which I've used ever since my conception of this idea, in saying that it really is one of the developmental issues, at least on the African continent, for this century. Right, the current conceptual framing that the literature tells us, the literature on urban food insecurity has also been an upcoming and increasingly bigger body of knowledge over the past few years. It hasn't existed that much until about 10 years ago, but then ever since then it's been increasing and building up a lot more. Two big things in terms of the conceptual framing is that there's seemingly globally an assumption that food security is still predominantly something that is a problem in rural areas. Secondly, it's that it's only a problem of the availability of food, and therefore the solution is as simple as produce more food, and then we'll have the answer. So that's two parts of the conceptual framing currently, which is not entirely true. So the literature frames it as being a rural bias, if you look at the literature. And they're calling it a rural bias because they say that the urban issues are being left out of public policy debates, out of public policy making, etc., especially when it comes to food, not necessarily when it comes to other issues, but to urban food issues specifically. In South Africa, we in terms of food security, the main document that has been used for the past few years, since 2002, is the Integrated Food Security Strategy document, or at least the document that has to a certain extent framed what the Department of Agriculture has been doing about food security, and what the National Development Plan has been saying about food security. On page 28, they make a statement to say that rural food security, or one of the primary objectives, is to overcome rural food security. So You might want to argue that same bias is to a certain extent also evident in that document, but that's just a side matter, and something that can be discussed in many different ways. So I'm going to skip through the next slide. Now, Battersby, Jane Battersby is her name. She's one of the sort of influential authors in South Africa, at least in terms of the upcoming problem of urban food security in both South Africa and on the continent. And she also talks about this current conceptual framing and saying that it doesn't count for the daily struggles of urban dwellers, and in terms of how they access food. Now, in 2010, two authors came up with what they called the new food equation. It simply came from the fact that because we've got cities and because we've got people moving to cities a lot faster than what used to happen, you've got a new way of thinking in terms of food that is developing in cities. That's the short and sweet of where it comes from. And then they say because of this new way of thinking about our food in cities, cities can offer a lens or a perspective of how we think about sustainability, how we think about human survival, how we think about ecology, because so many more people now have to live together in an urban area, and therefore we have to, it's almost like a microcosm of how we live with the environment and with ourselves and with ecology. Right, a few challenges with regards to the framing of food insecurity, which I've talked about in terms of how it has been framed and how it maybe needs to be framed in the future when it comes to urban food, is that spatial factors in many cases seem to be neglected. Now, spatial factors in a city context, meaning how does the city look, how does the food system of the city look in a holistic systemic sort of way. Where do you find food, where don't you find food, how far does it have to travel to come into the city, etc., etc. That's what's meant by the spatial factors. In South Africa specifically, according to the literature, an issue seems to be how we define urban, or what constitutes urban, and that's maybe slightly easier because urban is constituted to a certain extent by law and by the Municipal Boundaries Act. So that's maybe not so difficult. The more difficult thing is how do you define urban poor? And that's maybe something that's slightly more on a philosophical and deeper level, but something that also needs to be considered in a lot more depth and in a lot more detail. The last comment maybe slightly more of a global comment than a South African comment, but nevertheless, saying that at the time when, looking at the world, at the time when organizations such as the Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Food Program, when those came into existence, it was the late 40s, middle 40s to late 40s, and at that time the food was conceptualized in a rural manner, which meant that people who were trained to work with those issues were trained against a rural background, which once again makes more than sense, because at that time that was the situation, but it can be considered as being a challenge to how we currently need to conceptualize food in an urban setting. And then lastly, the impact of the market and food prices. That I don't have to say much more about that. We are all consumers. We are all people having to live every day, and we know what the market and prices does to food in a city context. Coming back to Battersby again, a late article, a 2012 article a very recent article that she wrote. She started talking about the food geography of people and of cities, saying that we need to, once again, it's a much more holistic, systemic way of looking at it, but saying that we need to look at the geography of food retail and food sources and how that is situated within the broader spatial structure of a city, and she calls that foodscapes. And she says to really fully understand what's happening in a city, we have to understand how households navigate their foodscapes and their food geographies, because that will allow us to have a deeper understanding of both the spatial and the non-spatial issues when it comes to food insecurity. And last thing which I want to say with regards to literature and theory for now is the concept of a food system, which is to a certain extent the start of where my thinking of the masters came from. The concept of a food system widely used basically means the chain of activities that connects food production, processing, distribution, consumption, and waste management. And basically all the activities in between, including laws, regulatory activities, and institutions. There's two figures I have for you. The first one is very complex. The second one is slightly less complex. The slightly less complex one is the one I'll use as point of reference, but I wanted to show you this one. And this one is more complex because it includes nutrition as well. Okay, so you've got a food system picture, you've got nutrition, and just to show you that once again, which will eventually show you how my topic came into being, is that the consumer is always at the middle of everything. It's at the center of inputs and outputs. It's at the center of between the producer and nutrition. It's at the center between raw resources and health issues. And it basically is linked to every other element of the food system in some other way, may it be a bigger or a smaller way. Now, the more simpler picture to understand is simply the 5 broad elements of a food system as conceptualized by those two authors, and which is now mainly used as saying that this is what a food system in a city looks like in terms of the elements. Once again, thinking about my master's degree, I realized that you can't, and also thinking about my research projects for the institute, you can't look at a whole system, as a whole system. You'll be crazy, you'll be off your mind, because that is a research project probably for about 5 years or longer. So I realized that I'm going to have to choose one of these elements, and I chose consumption. For the simple reason that consumption, as I said in the previous picture, is linked to many other of the elements. And for the simple reason that consumption can hopefully then, when you look at a household and you look at consumption, tell us something about the distribution. It can tell us something about the production. It can tell us, or it can give us a little bit of a slight insight maybe into what families and households do with their food waste, etc., etc. So that's that. Right. Methodology. As you've seen in the past few slides, a literature review was done, and to a certain extent, I think literature reviews are ongoing. You always find new knowledge, and you always try to incorporate that. So that's to a certain extent an ongoing process. My empirical data was done in Mamelodi. Right now, Mamelodi was chosen as case study. And specifically the eastern part of Mamelodi, which I'll show you a map now to show you how I got to that. Mamelodi was chosen as being a relatively, it's a relatively substantial part of the population of the city of Tshwane, if you want to look at the city. And it's a residential area that, even though in history it was known as being a black township, which it still is, it's a residential area that offers a broad variety of all levels of society in terms of income, in terms of living structures. So it's a case study part of the city that offers you a good diversity of people that are actually richer than you might think, people that are sort of upcoming middle class, and people that are really very poor. You've got a good combination of built houses, or so-called bond houses, normal average built houses of brick. You've got RDP houses, and you've obviously got large informal sections as well. So I'll show you the map now. So now, how do I get into Mamelodi? Next question. And I realized that the only way to do that is to use key informants, first of all, so that are identified through a link from the University of Pretoria, in terms of one of the lecturers who directed me to one of the churches in Mamelodi, where I eventually found my 3 and later a 4th key informant through another organization. Stratified random method of sampling. Now, what that simply means, in simple terms, is that it's random sampling, but it's random sampling with with some prerequisites. So it's random, but the prerequisite was that it should, as far as possible, try to focus on those that on the urban poor. Once again, in the beginning I said the urban poor is difficult to conceptualize. So when I went to the key informants, I told them what I want to do is, and those people I want to talk to are the people who really struggle from day to day. So please take me to the people in your networks, in your church, in your communities, those ones that you know really, really, really struggle. Because you can't exactly go to someone's door and ask, listen, are you poor? Can I talk to you? That won't work. So that's why I used it like that. And then the last thing, snowball sampling. So snowball sampling or chain referral sampling is a method where the participants whom contact has already been made with, so in other words, my key informants, where they use their social networks to refer you to other participants. And my supervisor and I just said that's the quickest and most effective way to do it, and it was. It was a very effective way to do it. It worked very well. So if ever I have to do a study like this again, I will definitely use snowball sampling again. The sample size was 40 households, semi-structured in-depth interviews. Now, the area, they were spread out through 7 different wards, if you look at the ward maps of the city of Tshwane. Now, if you look at the city of Tshwane, that's just a broad picture in terms of where Mamelodi is, and most of you will know that, so don't worry too much about that. That one. That is the map that is used, or one of the maps that's used in the integrated development plan of the city of Tshwane. And if you can see this purple area here, okay, that is basically Mamelodi, or at least the biggest part of Mamelodi, which is considered as being high density areas in terms of population, and disadvantaged areas that has infrastructure and services, but possibly not enough to cater for the population, and which obviously then needs some more infrastructure development. And then at the very, very, very corner of this, there are two yellow areas, and the yellow areas are what is considered as being highly informal settlements. So that picture is basically Mamelodi East, and that's just trying to show you that the area that I chose were not just randomly chosen. It actually also fits within the integrated development plan of the city. So just a quick summary of the wards where I found my households. It was wards 16, 17, 18, 40, 86, 97, and 100. And the number of houses, and you can see that I had a relatively good spread of shacks, or informal, highly informal areas, RDP houses, and then also built, or what is called bond houses. That's just a map of Mamelodi showing, just putting those wards into a pictorial illustration so that you can see it slightly easier. So you can see that it's a relatively good geographic spread of the area. So that's the areas where I went to. Right, I'm not going. I've got a few pictures, but and it's not of all the areas, because once again, many of you, it's not a picture that as South Africans we consider to be a totally unknown picture. So I don't have to show too many pictures, but there's this area. It's just outside Ward 40, in Ward 100. Is an area called Donkerhoek. Donkerhoek is about 5 kilometers east of where you enter Mamelodi from the Solomon Maslango Drive side. And the people living there are people that has been moved from the plot in Bronkhorstspruit, which are basically on this side of the national highway, of the N4 highway leading there. So they lived on plots for many years, and then the farmer said, okay, well, we don't want you to live on our plots anymore, and they were moved to Donkerhoek, and to a settlement called Pomolong. Now, Pomolong is really very. There's no water, there's no electricity, there's no nothing. The soil looks like the Sahara Desert after 5,000 years. It's very hard, very dry soil, And that's just one or two pictures to show you how that specific, how Pomalong specifically looks. All right. Now, what you see here is, just to go back to the map, is this area over here. Once again, you can see on the map there's not actually any streets, and that's there's no streets because there is no streets. It's also a highly informal area, very new. It's only been around for about 5 years, and that's how it looks. How it looks there. So you can see it's a very it's not very developed yet. It's basically the RDP houses and the walls separating the houses, and that is just at the end of that section. That's how it looks. So they are still making that area bigger, but they are now extending it with informal built shacks. Right. So just to give you a quick snapshot, the methodology. As I said, it was a semi-structured interviews, and it was an interview schedule. It was not. I mean, there were some questions, but the questions were there to lead me. It was done in a discussion format with the participants, and it was done in such a way that they always feel comfortable, that they always feel relaxed, and that they know it's a discussion, and it's not me sitting there asking them questions, and they just have to say yes or no. So the interviews lasted roughly for about 25 and 35 minutes per household, depending on obviously the answers that people gave, and the interviews were recorded with the permission of all the interviewees. So I've got transcripts of all the interviews because I then listened to it and transcribed it, and I then started to do a first level of inductive coding on the transcripts. And what I will show you in the rest of the presentation in terms of is some preliminary findings from that first level coding, which is normally in a research process the descriptive coding. The second level of coding, which will be where you identify more detailed key themes or patterns. That will follow when I start preparing my journal article and when I start preparing the in-depth analysis of the dissertation. Maybe before I go to these key preliminary findings, a few general observations with regards to the interviews themselves. In all cases, the people were very, very welcoming, very open, very happy to talk to me, and they really appreciated the fact that someone was interested enough to actually listen to them and their story. When I started the interviews, I always told people and once again trying to put them at ease and tell them that this is not a question and answer session, it's a discussion between you and me. I told them I'm here to listen to your story. I want to listen to your story, and because I told people that I think the story is important, and we can't understand the problems if we don't know the story first, and we can't really find answers to the problems if we don't understand the story first. And most people were really very welcoming and very, very happy that that someone actually was interested enough in their life to sit and listen to their story. Right. So, coming to some preliminary findings. And this is also not unexpected. All of us would understand the country in its current situation. Financial resources. First thing that people were considering as one of the biggest hindrances in making sure that there's food on the table. Not an unknown fact, and we don't have to think why it's like that. So you have unemployment, obviously closely linked to that, but more so in many cases they maybe saying that there was total unemployment is not true. In many cases there were employment, but it was not stable employment, and it was unpredictable. So it was small piece jobs that would maybe last for 1 or 2 days per week, sometimes 3 days per week, but some weeks it doesn't happen, and so which means that it's a unstable, unpredictable flow of income, which makes it very sporadic. And the reason why I say that maybe if you say unemployment, some people would argue with me in saying, well, it's not it's not unemployment if there is some level of unstable employment. And for example, I remember we had a seminar some time back where the International Labour Organization told us that they've actually got a very broad understanding of employment. If you sell something out of the house, even if it's 2 tins of something per day, then basically you are employed. So I mean, once again, that's maybe a broad way of looking at it, and it's maybe debatable. But the fact is that, according to them, if you do sell something, and if you have some sort of way of getting a little few rands into your household each month, you are not totally unemployed. So that's just maybe a distinction to think of for the future. So yeah, biggest issue is that its income is sporadic. It's unpredictable and it's unstable. Right, now the next one, once again, not a thought we don't know anything about. Social grants and the importance of it. Right, so I mean, I think the latest statistics are that something like 16 million people in South Africa receive social grants. I might be speaking under correction, and if someone has the latest statistics, that please don't hesitate to tell us. But I think the last time I read that was roughly the statistics. So in many cases, social grants were actually the main source of income, and by main I mean either the biggest chunk of the income or the biggest proportion of the income, or obviously the most stable one, because it comes every month. In many cases, or in some cases, not many, in some cases these were supplemented, but once again they were supplemented by what I said in the previous slide, by piece jobs, unstable income, sporadic sources of income, and highly unpredictable. People don't really know when it will come. Someone might call them one day, someone might not call them the next day. So it was supplemented in some cases, but in very sporadic ways. And then not a lot actually, but very few people were actually selling a few things out of their houses, sweets, chips, and cigarettes, like the normal small spaza shop trading you could expect to see. But that was there's a lot of competition for that. So if people do it, it's not a very big part of the income, and I mean they'll do it, but it won't. I mean it will supplement, but it won't supplement to such an extent that it will make a very big difference. One nice story though is this guy that I found who was making his own bathtubs out of steel. His father taught him to do this, and now after minusing the cost of buying the steel, he goes to buy it in Silverton at some factory. So after taking away the cost of buying the steel, and after the transport of actually getting to the place in Silverton and getting a small truck to deliver it to his house, he makes about 3,000 rand per month for his family, between 3,000 and 3,500 rand. So once again, that's not a lot, but it's one hell of a lot more than what many households would be able to say. So that's a nice story of someone who are using their hands and their skills, and something their father taught them, to actually also make some money for their household. Right, sources of food. I'm not going to talk too much about that, and there's because that's a total study for another day. Supermarkets. Maybe just this one thought in terms of literature. Supermarkets are considered to be the main source of or the main place of food purchasing in cities in general. If you look at literature and if you look at what it says on paper, and that's not untrue in this study as well. But it's not true for the whole month. It's true for the beginning of the month. So people would go to ShopRite or Pick n Pay at the beginning of the month, and it would, in about 70% of all the households, or at least those who receive social grants, they do it at the place where they receive their grant. So they go to ShopRite to actually collect the grant, and then while they are there, they will just buy the basic big items for the month, things like mealie meal, things like rice, cooking oil, sugar, tea, Dry items, the big things that can keep, or that they will need, that basic food items that they basically need for the whole month. And then the rest of the purchases will, if something run out, will be supplemented by using spaza shops or small tuck shops, which are found within walking distance from them. I think the house that where a spaza shop was the furthest away was something like 10 minutes walk. I mean, out of all the households which I actually talked with or had an interview with. Now, the importance of spaza shops was really, highlighted. I've read some studies before, and I've read studies where they did speak about the importance of it. But it was just nice for me to see in the study that what they say about the importance is actually really true. It really is very important. It's a very, very important source of income that are very frequently visited for these small supplementary food purchases, daily items. So that's very important. The biggest issue, however, though, are dissatisfaction with the ownership of spazas. And not necessarily with the fact that they are foreigners, but with the way they do their business. Someone told me, I remember someone told me that she doesn't want to go to the spaza shop closest to her because it's owned by a Pakistani, which once again is not the problem. But she said, well, he sleeps in his little shop or his little stall or whatever you want. He sleeps there, he washes there, and she doesn't want to buy food in a place where that happens. That's maybe one very extreme example, but that's just one of the stories that someone told me. The maybe a slightly bigger issue though is that when spaza shops were still owned by South Africans, however many years that might be back. Some people tell me it's been 5 years, that they didn't have South African owners. It's been 10 years. But whatever long that distance might or that number of years might be, the biggest issue was that South African owners used to offer them goods on credit, so they could actually pay it off, and and many of the foreign owners, they said, does not want to do that. They do not want to give them goods and items on credit. So yeah. Lastly, urban agriculture. Now literature is ripe of stories about urban agriculture. Broadly speaking, in terms of statistics, if you look at literature, it doesn't seem to be that big a source of food in South Africa yet. It's a very big source of food in many other African countries. I also remember having a conversation with a lady from Malawi a year or two ago, and she, for example, told me that up to 60% or sometimes even higher of people actually grow something in their garden in terms of vegetables. So that's a very high statistic, but it's not the same in South Africa, or at least not yet, and not in all the parts of Mamelodi where I went. This was, people exhibited a need or a desire for growing something in a garden. But in especially Mahube phase 1 and 3 and 4, I will go back to the map just now because there's a story about a specific vegetable garden I want to tell you. But they many of those people expressed a real interest in the role that food gardens can play, and they were really saying that they've used it and it's played a big role in making sure that households are more food secure, that households have more food to eat. So in probably about half of my study sites, it was really considered to be quite a big source of food for households, but not only for households themselves, but in many cases also for the neighbors, the larger community, etc. I'm not doing the wrong thing. I thought I was. There we go. Okay. Lastly, with regards to the sources of food is something that I've actually spoken about already, so I won't spend too much time on that. But food prices is a complaint and is a worry, and it's not just a worry for someone who is poor; it's a worry for someone who has a better level of income, because the food prices are just skyrocketing at incredible rates. Right. A very, very interesting aspect of, and there's actually, apart from this, there's actually 3 or so more aspects that I quickly want to touch on, which I didn't put in the slides, and not because of any deliberate reason. I was just, I just thought it might be interesting to also highlight that for you. The relationships between communities. Now, why I say relationships, there was one open-ended question where I asked, because the point of the study is to try and find out if people don't have money. I mean, and if you wake up one morning as a household and there's no money in the house, there's no food anywhere to be found in the house, what are you going to do? Are you going to borrow something from someone? Are you going to go to your neighbors and ask for help? Are you going to go to a church and ask for help? What are you going to do? So I asked the question in asking if there are days like that, and I was trying to make it slightly less sensitive by not referring to because I mean some people did really tell me that many mornings we wake up and there's nothing to eat. So I was trying to just find out from them around their community, around their street where they live, do they think that the community members will go to their neighbors? Do they think that people will ask for help if they really need it? And many people say they don't feel comfortable to do that. In some cases, for the simple reason that they are scared that they will become the topic of discussion, and that that people will start talking about them and about their problems. And there's 1 or 2 examples which I actually want to read. Yeah, someone is saying, I can't. If I go to my neighbor and ask him, I will tell him, and the next moment he will go to someone and tell them what my problems are, and then that was only one example, but it was said in a few cases. So it's a slightly a pride issue, and in Donkerhoek, which I showed you the pictures of in the beginning. Donkerhoek actually has if you look at the blocks that is laid out, they told me that the blocks actually have people of different cultures and nations living in them. So across from where I had one of my main interviews, they were saying that the block across the street are only Mozambicans, and the block next to them are only Zimbabweans. So they were saying that because of language and culture, and if you read between the lines. They didn't tell me that, but if you read between the lines, acceptance in terms of they don't really want the people to live there, because of those reasons. They also feel they can't talk to them, and they can't go to them to ask for help. So that's maybe an important point to note when it comes to communities and the relationships between communities and between neighbors and how people live with each other in proximity to each other. The other issues which I quickly wanted to point out, which are not on the slide, so don't look at the slides now, are the emotional distress of families, and what a situation where there's no food on the table to eat means for the family. What does it mean for the emotion of the families, the family structure. There's actually 2 stories I quickly want to read you. The one is I was asking, how does this situation make you feel? And she started crying, and she said, sad, and she said, I feel responsible because if I struggle now, what about my children after a few years? So it becomes the sustainability issue, it becomes the future issue, it becomes what of the future? The question of what will happen 5 years down the line, what will happen 10 years down the line. Another mother said, and this was really not a, I almost started crying myself. She was divorced from her first husband. She got married to her second husband, and then something happened. Or the husband died, and then something happened in terms of the relationship between her and the children of her second husband. In terms of the children not wanting her to live in the house anymore. They didn't want to, they were saying that, no, well, look, you can't live here anymore now, and but the short and sweet is basically that they threw her out, so now she lives in an RDP house, and has been living there for about, I think, 3 or 4 years. And she was saying, my life is broken up, even when I talk about my late husband. That family chased me away from that house, and they took everything that I had. It breaks my heart. I feel so sad. My children, 3 of them I got, and I love them so much, but I have got nothing to give them. And when my son is fighting with me because of food, I also feel terrible because I've got nothing to give. Now, where that statement comes from, there was about the only money they really receive is a disability grant from her son, which is 1,260 rand per month. And there was a time. I mean, I was there in November. So between February of last year, of 2013, and September of 2013, the grant for her son was just cut. For no reason. One day she just realized that there's nothing anymore. So there was a situation of 6 months where they basically had nothing. There's a church sort of just behind them where they were able to find some food. On Sundays the church had a warm cooked meal, a plate of food. So they found that food once a week there, but for the rest, she had a neighbor who helped her a bit, but there wasn't an awful lot more than that. And it was winter time, so it was cold. It was and then she said many days when her son was asking her for food, and she told him, "But listen here, there's nothing." He was picking up things in the house and throwing it at her and throwing it through the window and being angry. So the levels of distress on families, I think, is something that should not be understated, and we should not stop talking about that and stop trying to think about that. The other two linked to that, feelings of hopelessness, feelings of just totally being hopeless, having no hope for the future, having no hope for life, having no hope for your children. It came through very strongly, even in the ones that did, even in the interviews that did not give me as strong and as sad statements as the ones we just heard. It still came through. People are hopeless. People have really no hope for a lot of things. And the last thing is the loss of trust in the government. I asked the question, and I realized later on, doing it 6 months before the election is maybe in hindsight, you shouldn't. Maybe you're going to only get a certain type of answers if you ask that question. But the question I asked was simply, do you think that the government, the city of Tshwane, the local councillors, the municipality, do you think they understand the situation of your house? Do you think they know what's going on? And most of them said no. But there's one statement which I quickly want to read you, which if I can find it now. Oh, there we go. Yeah. According to me, the government, they prosper because of us. They won the election because of us. So why can't they go to each and every one and see what people eat and what is going on? So we need them to pull up their socks and come and see what's going on, what is short there and here, there and there. It's what we need. Okay? So, and that's just one statement, but once again, a sentiment that was repeated probably throughout all 40 households. Is that the councillor doesn't really care, the councillor doesn't really want to come here. So that's why I say they were saying they were really appreciative because I came to listen to their story, and they said, it's the job of the councillor, but he or she doesn't do it. So right. Last thing, resources, and just about water and electricity. Main complaints, main crisis is the cost of it once again, and how expensive it is. In the case of Pomolong, however, which I showed you earlier, as I said, there's no water, there's no electricity. People were to a certain extent dumped there from the plots in Bronkhorstspruit, and now they live there. So they've got a truck who brings water every day. Well, they hope every day. Some days the truck skips a day, and then there's no water for that day. So I asked them, is it possible for you to sell something? Is it possible for you to go out and try and make some money somewhere? And they said, well, it's not possible because they first have to wait for this truck to bring water, because they don't know at which time it is, and they have to wait for this truck to bring water, so they can't just leave their house and go out and do something now, because then they might miss the truck, which means they won't have water for that day, which means they can't cook, they can't clean themselves and their children, etc., etc. So that's a big issue. And then the water that people do have are in most cases very expensive, and in most cases also not always enough. And by not enough, I mean that it can cover the basics. You can cook your food and you can do your washing, and that's basically it. But when it comes to agriculture and having a food garden, having some sort of vegetable garden, having something in your garden, people just say, well, I don't have water for that because I have to use the little water that I have for more basic things than that. Now, yeah, and then last thing is a lack of consolidated space, and what I mean by that is referring to one specific interview, or at least, or a discussion with one of my key informants, where she said what she would appreciate and what she thinks would really help is one place, almost like a community engagement center type of thing, where you will have a vegetable garden, you will have a space where people can use their skills to make crafts, to make clothes, and at that same spot you can also have a place where you can sell it. That was one. That's maybe just a nice thought at the back of your head in terms of what people were saying, in terms of what they think might help. Just by the way, these issues about lack of trust in government, urban agriculture. 5 minutes, yeah, thanks. Less, okay, that's fine. These things all came mainly from the basic open-ended question, where I asked people, what do you think more needs to change for you to be able to put more food on the table, for life to be a bit better? I mean, by what more needs to change, I was trying to get away from the obvious answer of jobs and money, which led to urban agriculture. I'm going to conclude with two things. That's just some pictures of this was actually in Mahube, in a very informal section where people had like a very small little bit of vegetables, which was nice, in front of their yards. Now, I want to conclude with 30 seconds on this story, and then with a few last thoughts. This is a vegetable farm. I actually need to quickly go. Sorry for the very bad way of skipping through slides, but I want to quickly show you where it is. There. Right at the top there, there's a vegetable garden. Now, what happened there actually happened. It actually happened here as well, in 2 houses. It was a huge rubbish dump, and by huge I mean I think it's about a half an acre size. It's pretty big. It was a big rubbish dump, and they changed it to. They tried to clean it up, or they decided they're going to clean it up and they're going to turn it into a vegetable garden. And this was the result. They've got mealies growing up the hill. This was so they've got. That was the result, which is, you can see. I mean, this is actually not where it starts. It starts even a few more street blocks to that side, and it goes on more street blocks to this side. So it's really big. It's probably about a half an acre. Maybe not as big as a full acre, but it's pretty big. So they supply vegetables to daycares like this. They supply vegetables to themselves. It's an incredibly positive project. One lady specifically started about 5-6 years ago with the little money that she had, and she said, first of all, this place is dirty, I need to clean it. Second of all, there's no food for my family. And she started with this, and this garden has just grown bigger and bigger every year, and they couldn't give me number of households, a number of people, but they told me that they are really they are really helping a lot of people. Right, conclusion is that I think we need to continue to engage in discussions and research about new and alternative sources of food for the urban poor. And obviously looking at things like urban agriculture, but also trying to find out what other sources of food there potentially can be. Because, that can be on top of the only relying on social grants from the government. Because only relying on social security assistance, in my opinion, cannot be sustainable in any sort of way. And I think linked to that, we need to continue to engage and try and do research about new forms of income generation for households who struggle, especially poorer households in an urban setting. And then what I said right at the beginning, how to define the urban poor. Maybe we need to think deeper, think more philosophical about how do we define the urban poor, which is obviously a quickly rising component of the poor section of the population of the country. Creating more awareness on urban agriculture, creating more opportunities for it to take place, because as that one big vegetable garden shows, it can work. It can make a difference. It has made a big difference, and they in other places as well. And lastly, the diversification of food sources and diets. Because people's diets are just not very diversified. It's basically pap and pap. So it's in meat. People are able to add meat maybe for the first 2 weeks of the month, but not after that. People were able to add maybe some vegetables for the first 2 or 3 weeks of the month, but not after that. So dietary diversity is a concern, and I think if we don't start thinking about that, will remain a concern. As I said, this is a work in progress. It's part of my master's dissertation. That's my email address. If you have any thoughts, please don't hesitate to talk to me.